Hi guys, so welcome to the third episode of the Power Striker series, hosted by Accra Power Platform User Group. So today, Albert is going to take over. He's going to hit more on the SharePoint and then the Power App, but he will do more of the SharePoint and then also do some recaps of what we've also discussed earlier as well. So, Albert, over to you now.
Thank you very much, Shadrach, and welcome to you watching us wherever you are. My name is Albert Quist. I'm a power platform specialist with one of the Ghanaian banks. I'm also a co-facilitator for the Accra Power Platform User Group, Ghana, since 2019. And I have 3 to 4 years experience in Power Apps development. Yes, that's a bit about me. I am single. I'm also cybersecurity specialist with a master's degree in cybersecurity. So let me know if you can see my screen. Shara, can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay. So today we are going to look at SharePoint and granting permissions to users. Now, I would commend Shadrach for a good job done in the first and second episode. I would do a little bit of recap and go on with the permission granting. So, in every software development application, there are 3 tiers to it. You have the front end, you have the middle tier, which comprises the coding, and then you have the data source. When it comes to SharePoint Power Apps has the 2 tiers. That is the front end, which is your design, dragging and dropping components, and then the logic, which is mostly Power FX. Now, SharePoint has the ability to interface Power Apps. Likewise, Excel has the ability to to be a data source, let me put it that way, for Power Apps. Before we have Dataverse, SQL, and other sources. So, in this episode, we are going to look at SharePoint as a data source for Power Apps. Now, in every data source, we look at data types, but using them extensively means that you would want to grant permission to certain people, as in to edit applications, to just read data, to write into that data source, or to even edit the data source. These are permissions that you would want to grant to certain people. Now, Shadrach has taken us through the site. So, see a site as, let's say, a group for specific people. So, you can have an HR site, you can have, say, marketing site, and you can have the IT site, right? So if you are in HR, you are going to be one, a site owner or a member. We are going to look at the differences. The site owners have, should I say, maximum permission, that is super admins. Then the site members could have some level of permission. Then we have visitors of the site. So if I'm in IT and I need to access data or a list in the HR site, I go there as a visitor before the privileges could be escalated to maybe say a member, right? So if I'm a visitor, what kind of permission do I have? Maybe I am in that HR site just to read data, or just to write data, or just to edit data. We are going to look at all these and how to apply them. Okay, so that is just a little bit intro. That is the main reason why this episode is there. So if you have an application sitting in HR site, you want HR members to be able to edit, but the rest of the team, that is visitors, you just want them to read data or just to write data into it. We are going to look at how to set these permission levels. So let's do that before we go to some of the data types that Shadrach touched on. So any site you would want to grant permission, or you would want to edit its permission, you'd first of all have to select the site. In this my environment, I have just my communication site, but Shadrach has taken you through how to create sites, so I'm not touching on that. So let's say this is my communication site. What I want to do is permissions, right? So I do settings and I come to site permissions. What do I want to do? Advanced permissions. Okay. So now, as I said, we have three categories of people on every site: the site owner or owners, the members, and the visitors. Now, they all have permission levels, which is on the extreme right, which is permission levels column. Now, if you look at permission levels for site members, they can edit the site, right? But the owners have full control. That's like the super admin level, and visitors can only read. Now, if you look at the permission pane over here, the ribbon, you can see permission levels on top here. So now let's select permission levels. Now you have the permission and the description over here. So anyone with full control permission level has full control over the site. Anyone with design permission level can view, add, update, delete, approve, and customize the site, or even a list in the site. Then we have the edits. They can add items to a list. They can edit and delete the list. They can also view, they can add, they can update, and all that. Then we have the contribute, and some of these permission levels come by default, but you can add your own permission level. So in a situation where the organization doesn't want people to delete items, right? When you are granting permission, you don't have to add a delete, especially to a visitor. It means that the visitor can come and delete data that ideally. So let's say you have a banking application or an HR system, and the visitors go there. So the HR system or list is sitting in the HR site, right? And a normal employer, say from IT, goes in there with full permission, and they are able to delete their record. It's going to be very detrimental to that particular software. So you look at scenarios where you want certain people to be able to edit, or to just view, or to even delete items in a list. That is why the permission level is needed. So over here, if we want to add our own permission level, all we do is add a permission level. Then we can give a name to it. Say visitor. Then let me just say I'd want the visitor to be able to add item, edit item, or even view items, right? So we have the list permissions over here. You can select all, but for visitor we don't need to grant permission to all. So over here, it comes with the description. Manage list means that you can create and edit a list. You can add or remove columns in a list and add or remove public views of a list. But we don't want to grant such a permission to a visitor. Secondly, you can override list behaviors, that is, discard or check in a document which is checked out to another user. Now, if it's add items, you can add item to a list and add documents to a documents library. If you don't grant this permission to a visitor and you share your applications with them, realize that the app is working all right, but they can't write data to the list because they don't have access to the data source. So yes, you've shared Power Apps with them, but you realize sometimes that Power Apps will tell you share the various components, which is the list, and sometimes the components that the app relies on, share it with the user. Now, if you shared the SharePoint list with the user, but you've not granted that user permission to add items, they are going to submit their form, but it's not going to be recorded. So we select the add item. Then you can select edit item. Means that items in a list, they should be able to edit them, right? That is why the edit is there. Would you want people to delete items from your SharePoint list or documents or anything? But you first of all have to look at your organization's policy. Would your organization want data to be deleted? In a situation where you are working for a bank, ideally we don't allow deleting items unless we don't allow visitors to delete items, right? Unless maybe a super admin has been granted permission or giving the go ahead from their supervisor that okay, yes, you are allowed to delete this record. That is when you delete them. Now, approve items, that is approval in SharePoint list. Open items, view permissions, delete versions, view versions, delete versions, and all that. Do we want to do all that? So, what I mostly do is add, edit, and view, right? Because our applications rely on those things. You would want to add an item, you would want to look for an item, you would want to edit an item. So, these are the permissions that I grant for a list. Now, this is the site permission. So, for that user, what do you want them to do with that site? Do you want them to manage permissions, view web analytics, and all that? But we don't want this for visitors because they are not part of that site. We just want them to access a particular list. So we are going to leave that one open, but they can view their pages. So realize when I selected add, it selected view and then edit. Yes, because it's dependent on the ad is dependent on the view, right? So we have personal permission. So you can add or remove personal web parts, update personal web parts. So these are the settings that I normally use in all my applications, provided I want to grant access to visitors to my site. But we've gone through them. If you look through it and you feel you would want to add or remove some based on your organization's policy, you can do that. So we create. Now realize that the visitor has been added to the list of permissions over here. So now let's go to site content and let me take a list. Okay, which list would I look at now? It's a very long list. When did I create 2020? No, it was modified. So let's deal with this one. Okay, so I go to settings, then I go to permissions for this list. Now, if I want to add permission, I'd have to stop inheriting the permissions. Okay, so when I do stop inheriting, then I can now go to grant permissions. So I don't know, I've forgotten some of the people in my organization's name. Okay, so I have first user. Okay, so what I'll do is grant permission, then I do first user, then show options. Okay, now under show options, you can decide to leave the send email invitation, or you can uncheck it. Then this is where you set the permission level. So is first user a visitor? Now another thing you can do is instead of the visitor column, you can type the level of permissions just like it's been done over here. But in my case where I know visitors would edit, view, and then add, that's why I did visitor. So I do this and I say share. So that has been done. Then you would want to check sometimes. So you realize that now visitor has been added. No, you let's check permissions. So sometimes someone will ask you, or you would want to know if someone has access to a particular list. That is where you do the check permissions. So I check for first user. Then you can see it over here. But first user in my case is part of my group, as in the communication site. But in situations where first user is not part and we've not added the read or edit, you are going to see just the visitor, right? But in this case, first user is a visitor, can read and edit. So in a situation where we've given the permissions, all these three permissions to the user is going to assume the highest, right? So let's say edit is for the user to just edit items, but even before edit, you must be able to read and then add data before you can even edit data. But let's just say the user has been given read access. Read means they can't edit. But in the visitor's permission, if the user has been given edit in the visitor's permission, it means that it's going to override all lower level permissions. So in a case like this, you are going to get the highest level of permission. Okay. So that's just about it when it comes to granting permissions for SharePoint site. And you use this extensively if you are security conscious, because some employees are very cunning, and then you might not want them to access certain information. So that is when you implement this. Okay. So now let's go back to our SharePoint site, and then let's do a little bit of recap on the data types. I'm not going to spend much time on that because Shadrach has done that already. So you have this button over here where you can select new. I know Shadrach has spoken about document library and list, so let's just move on to creating the list. and then I'll take time to explain some of them. Yes, so we have so many ways of creating a list. You can create a list from an existing list, which means that you are inheriting the columns, right? So you have, say, list one, where you have name, age, and some bio data in columns, and in you want to replicate that list in another list. Then you just have to bring from an existing list, or you can import from an Excel sheet, right? And in this case, you should ensure that you formatted the Excel sheet to have a header, or you can do from a blank list. So let's give it a name, say our okay. If you accept show navigation, it's going to add up to the list of navigations on top of your site, where you have the home, the documents, the pages, the site content, and edits. But I don't want it over there. And yes, you can add your description. So do create, and we have our list. Now you can add columns from here, right? But I normally don't enjoy adding columns from here. So I go to my site content, and then I browse my list, the ellipsis sign here, and I go to settings. Okay, so over here, this is where you do create column, right? So create column means you want to add a column, and these are the existing columns. Now by default, Microsoft provisions the modified, the created by, and the modified by. Let's look at the data types. The title is a single line of text. The modified is a date time. The created is a date time. The created by is a group or a person. Likewise modified by. Now, this is another security check for you. Okay. So sometimes you want to implement a control in your form that would allow the person who created the form to edit the form. That is, if you didn't create the form, you shouldn't be able to edit the form. You can reference the created by column. So you can say if the created by dot say the email is equal to the current logged in user dot email, then the forms mode should be edit, else it should be view. We are going to look at that going forward. When we start extensive use of Power Apps, we are going to look at that. Then the modified by. The modified by indicates who the last person was, the last person who modified the application, who that person was. That is how we implement the modified by. Okay, so now let's go to create column. Now in create column, we want to give the column name. Say yes. So column one. Say column one. So in column one, if you choose a single line of text, see a single line of text as okay, see it as you are just taking a single line compared to say accepting an address. But sometimes implementing it in Power Apps, you can use them You can use them interchangeably, but I always advise you go for the single line of text. Then you have the multi-line of text, which works just like single line of text, except that it has a very high capacity. Okay, so we look at choices. In choices, you are implementing something like giving options for people to select a particular choice. So that is where you can have a drop down where people select. So in choices, you add your choice over here, right? And you do this if it is definite, or sometimes too you can use a single line of text, and then when implementing that in Power Apps, you select allowed values so that it's going to drop down. That is, if you want to interface, if you want to implement the selection in the application, not at the back end. That is the front end of it. So sometimes there are going to be situations where you would need that. Okay. So over here, you would want it as a drop down, a radio button. We all know what radio buttons are. This is an example of a radio button where you see it's round. Then a checkbox. So this is an example of a checkbox. Okay. So sometimes too, you don't want to have a default value. That is, if the person doesn't select anything, what should be the default value? So I don't like implementing default values. But if the field is required, okay, I just select required over here. Now other times too, you can implement requirements in the application's front end. Okay, so based on your dynamics, how you would want to implement it. I normally don't do required over here because of the errors sometimes you might get, especially when you are working with other components such as maybe Power Automate, and you are not interested in, you are just interested in editing a particular column, and you see this required over here. It means that this column must have data. So I normally don't do that over here, but at the interface level. So that is how you implement the choices. Then the number field is going to accept a number. Okay, and you can specify the minimum or the maximum. Again, the question is, at what instance do you need a number, and at what instance do you need a string as in single line? Now you need numbers if you are going to apply some form of calculations on that record or that column. Okay, because if you have a string, you can't add a name and then maybe a first name and a second name. That one you can concatenate, but not add as in 1 plus 1, 2 plus 2, 3 plus 3. So it's normally advisable if you are going in for like specific numbers, say distance, right? And you don't want the people to input kilometers or meters. You are picking strictly numbers. You can implement this. Again, if there is going to be a situation where the numbers are dynamic, sort of, it's going to be, say, numbers and strings at the same time, but in a particular application, you want say the application one, it should implement strictly numbers in this column, and there is another application that is picking data from the same data source, but that application should pick maybe numbers and a string. Then you can implement that using the single line, but in Power Apps, you set the type to a number. So it's going to strictly take numbers for that interface, right? For application one, but application two, if you do if you don't select numbers and it's a string, it's going to accept both numbers and strings. So these are some of the dynamics when it comes to the back end and then the front end of your application, right? Then we have the currency. Obviously, you know what it does, right? So you have the format and everything over here. Then a date time. So you can use date time for date of birth, and it's oftentimes advisable to use a date time if you want um, a definite data, as in day, month, year, or month, day, year, or year, month, day. Okay. But if you use a string, let's say a single line, some people will input Thursday, so and so, so and so. Some people will just input the they'll ignore the day and just do maybe a month, a year, something. So if you want a definite date, this is when you need to use the date time. Then even with that, you can choose to ignore the timing when it comes to the interface. Okay, so this is default. Maybe by default you can say it should select today's date or none. Then over here is where you choose the set date and time. So if you want date and time, depending on your application, obviously if I am using this one as date of birth, you might not know the time that you were born, so you just go for the date. Okay, so that is how we implement this. And the lookup means that you want to reference another list, okay, or another column. Shadrach took you through that, but let me just explain that one briefly. So you have the get information from. Okay, so when you select that, it's going to give you a list of the lists that you have. So let's say I want to reference a particular column from, say, general secretary. Okay, and that column, what am I looking at? I'm looking at, say, the title, or the date it was modified, or vote count, or secret code, or something. Okay, then the columns to add, you have all these things over here. So it's always based on the application you want to use. Now we go to checkbox, yes or no. I normally don't like implementing checkbox because sometimes handling it in the interface becomes difficult, especially if it is very narrow. So you see, when you are using, say, a form, you can categorize the form into one column, a single column, two or three. Sometimes the interface is not nice to me. So what I do is, if I would want to implement a yes or no, and knowing very well that maybe going forward, my organization will want me to change from yes or no to yes, no, or maybe. They would want me to add something. The question is, how will I implement this? If it's just yes or no, I know yes, I have yes or no. But the people I work with would always come with changes. Does it mean that I would now have to set another column and then assign values to it? So if I have the option of giving someone a checkbox, I just do a single line. And then in the interface, I just do it a drop down, that is allow now, and then I input my data. We are almost behind time. It's supposed to be 1 hour, but it's 43 minutes now. I'm not so certain we can go deep into Power Apps. That is, if we can even go into it. So, in the next session, we are going to treat all these. Okay. So, before that, you can come up with some of the applications you would want us to work on. Okay. So, the kind of data you would want us to collect, if it is maybe bio data, or there is a project which needs just one list where the fields are not many, and you would want us to work on that, just text us. You can reach me on Twitter at quest_albert, and then in the Microsoft user group community Ghana, you can reach out to me on that. Now we are done with the yes or no. We look at persons. So sometimes in your application, maybe you are building an application that needs to send a message, an approval message to someone. Okay, you can select the person group, and then this one could be, say, approver, right? So that it is sent to that approver. That is how you use the persons. Then hyperlink or picture, as the name suggests, is just a hyperlink, so a URL. Okay. Then you have your calculated columns. So over here you can see calculation based on other columns. So you can do something like age. Okay, so if I select my date of birth based on today's date, you should be able to calculate my age. Okay, then we can have the image. How do you implement this image? The last time I implemented image was with um how do you call this, Power Apps signature, the signature action or component. So afterwards you pass it through automate, it converts your signature to an image, and it is stored over here. Before you have the task outcome, the external data, and the managed data. So I would want to end this episode over here and welcome questions if there is any. But on YouTube, your questions are welcome. You can also reach out to me or Shadrach, and then we are going to answer your questions. So I wouldn't give you any assignment today, but I want you to go and look for a real life problem that we can solve using SharePoint and Power Apps, so that in our next episode we treat that. But outside this, we can connect, and then I help you on any project, anything that you need help on. Okay, so thank you very much for your time and your patience. I really appreciate it, and I'm always available for you. So thank you.